Welcome to this week's episode of On Record PR, where we talk about the latest news, insights, and strategies that matter most to law firm leaders. It is Monday, May 5th. I'm Jennifer Simpson Carr, and I'm here with.
I'm Gina Rubel.
Good morning, Gina.
Good morning, Jen.
So, a lot has happened in the last week since we last recorded an episode in the legal industry. So, I want to talk to you about two things today. First, Law Day, and second, the executive order targeting Perkins Coie. So, let's start with Law Day. What is it and why does it matter?
So, Law Day is something that's been celebrated every year since 1958. And it's a day where lawyers really work to share the importance of the rule of law and the Constitution. As a member of the Philadelphia Bar Association, literally since my first year out of law school, which was more than 30 years ago, we would do things like going into schools and doing mock trials, for example, with students and getting them excited about the rule of law. This year was a little bit different, however, given the tenor of what's happening in our nation. So this year it was called Law Day of Action. And hundreds of bar associations around the country got together at noon on May 1st, which was this past Thursday, and the lawyers were all issued by a judge, and we all retook our oath to uphold the Constitution. And it was amazing. And Jen, I have to tell you, it was the first time I felt a real level of hope that our Constitution would live on and that the rule of law would live on under the current administration. So it was really special. But by the end of the day, on May 1st, Mr. Trump decided that he was going to put out another executive order renaming the day to Loyalty Day, which I don't really understand what that means. So I have to tell you, though, I took a lot of video and I saw people from every stage of my life and career. My dad's former law partners from the 1970s and 80s were there, and past chancellors going back as far as I can remember from the Bar Association, and young lawyers and LGBTQIA lawyers and trans lawyers and every nationality of people, every color of skin. And it was just really special. I left feeling a level of loyalty that was greater than I've ever had for the Philadelphia Bar Association. And I've not only been a member for over 30 years, but I've been on the board of governors and I've chaired committees for at least 25 of those years. So that says a lot. And I can say, while I'm not following everything every bar association is doing, because that's nearly impossible, the Philadelphia Bar has been leading by example, and I've never been more proud to call myself a member.
That's amazing. And as someone who was at the computer and on my phone that day, I was really moved by the videos and the pictures that were shared throughout social media, but also that you were sharing personally with our team. So thank you for standing up in that way. We were all incredibly proud to see the pictures that you sent.
Thank you. It means a lot to me because I've never been to a rally before. And for those of you listening, I have a little bit of PTSD from some high profile matters that I was a part of early in my career where I got death threats. So going to rallies and public groups like that, especially in the very place where it happened, where I was getting death threats in the mid 1990s, for me was a really big deal. But I felt safe and I was among friends and people that I would consider family. So it was special. And I'm glad I got to share that with all of you too, because it was fun. It was special. Yeah. And we all walked away with a feeling of hope and renewal that we are going to protect the Constitution and the rule of law.
So that's
Speak
amazing.
Before I forget, and don't forget about the pins, the rule of law pins. I gave out a
Yes,
bunch and now I have to get over 1,000 more because everybody wants one. So
good.
that's our little grassroots initiative that I plan to grow in the next few weeks.
That's amazing. So that was Thursday. And then more great news or more hope on Friday. So moving on to the Perkins Coie executive order that was targeting the firm. So on Friday, May 2nd, the Federal District Court for the District of Columbia permanently blocked the unlawful executive order targeting the firm. The ruling affirmed core constitutional freedoms, including freedom of speech under the First Amendment, due process under the Fifth Amendment, and the right to select counsel without the fear of retribution under the Fifth and Sixth Amendments. So, more hope on Friday. A statement on Perkins Coie's website said, quote, "We are pleased with this decision and are immensely grateful to those who spoke up in support of our positions. As we move forward, we remain guided by the same commitments that first compelled us to bring this challenge, to protect our firm, safeguard the interests of our clients, and uphold the rule of law." So amazing to see that announcement on Friday. And then the New York Times posted an article, and it said, quote, "The ruling was the first time a court had stepped in to permanently bar Mr. Trump from, from trying to punish a law firm he opposed politically." Judge Howell said that
And
attempts to bring,
a woman judge. I just have to say
yes,
that.
Judge Beryl Howell, a female judge, said that attempts to bring the firm to heel under the threat of retaliation amounted to unlawful coercion and imperiled its lawyers' ability to freely practice law. She said no American president has ever before issued executive orders like the ones at issue. In purpose and effect, this action draws from a playbook as old as Shakespeare, who penned the phrase, quote, "The first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers," end quote. So a really exciting moment on Friday. It was not just a legal win, it was a public relations, cultural, rule of law moment too. So Gina, how important is it for law firms to strike that tone when facing politically motivated attacks?
Jen, that's a great question. And we're getting this question almost daily from AmLaw clients that we represent and even smaller clients. So I think your question is very timely. Perkins Coie's statement emphasized constitutional freedoms, client interests, and the rule of law. In fact, I know you and I spoke about this earlier this morning. Microsoft announced last week that they are pulling all their work from Simpson Thatcher, which is also a firm that committed to perform $125 million of free legal work for causes acceptable to the current administration. Many are calling these acts by law firms capitulation. So they're moving. So when I refer to Microsoft is now moving their work to Jenner and Block, which is fighting a different executive order that targets their firm. So this is a really good example of a big corporation that is very DE&I and ESG focused, moving their work from a firm that's capitulating to the president's orders. And God knows how much that money that's worth. I don't know that I saw the exact amount. If we find it, we could certainly add it to the show notes, but it's a lot of money.
Mhm.
And when you think about what's happening in law firms when they're doing this analysis of should we or shouldn't we, and you start to think about the time they're spending in trying to negotiate terms with the current administration, the cost of the pro bono work, the cost of loss of clients, which this is proof, and the cost of loss of associates and partners. My gut tells me they're better off fighting these executive orders. And this is one of those instances where we see that playing out
Mhm.
faster than I ever remember these types of any kind of things playing out. But the courts are just saying, we're not going to wait. We're going to make decisions. We're going to move forward. These are constitutional issues. He may take it up to the Supreme Court, which I suspect he will. And I suspect that they will. I want to believe that they won't hear the case, because even though it's a constitutional matter, because they should uphold the judge's finding. It's really just insanity what's happening in our industry. So I think that's what's most important, in understanding that these things are happening. And we're seeing it across the board. In fact, before I forget, and I'm going to have to find the link, a lawyer left one firm very recently that capitulated, started his own firm, and the associates who have been fighting against all the different firms, including what's her name from Skadden,
Rachel
Rachel
Cohen.
Cohen, is now working for him.
Mm-hmm.
So it's amazing to see what's happening in the industry and how quickly all these associates are going to find jobs. No problem, because they're going to go to firms that have, you mentioned culture. It's not just public relations and business development. It's client retention and acquisition, but it's talent retention and acquisition. And it costs. Weren't you the one who shared an article with us that said that the loss of one partner or one associate
Every
is,
time an associate leaves every time a third year associate leaves an AmLaw 200 firm, it costs the firm $1 million.
so there you go. So
Mm-hmm.
you start adding these things up, and this is some of the things that law firms need to be thinking about, adding those costs up, and is it worth capitulating, or should you fight? And we've heard this rumor many times now in the industry. A lot of people think the law firms that are capitulating have something to hide.
Yes.
I'm
That has
not going to
crossed my
say that's
mind.
true. I don't know that that's true. I have no evidence to say that that's true. That's just what is being speculated.
Right.
There's a lawyer in
So,
me talking, by the way.
yeah, of course. So we're going to pause here for a message from our sponsor. And when we return, we'll talk about what these hopeful moments mean for law firms and what we see coming down the pike.
This episode is brought to you by Furia Rubel Communications, a public relations and marketing agency serving law firms and businesses worldwide. With an expert team positioned throughout the U.S. and supported by an international faculty, Furia Rubel enhances our clients' brands through integrated communications by providing expert guidance in crisis management and high-profile litigation, protecting brand and reputation, and supporting internal marketing teams. To learn more, visit furiarubel.com.
So, Gina, we're back from our sponsor break, and we've talked about Law Day. We've talked about the decision regarding the executive order targeting Perkins Coie. Why does this matter for every law firm?
So all of this matters because legal nuance often gets lost in the headlines and what the media reports versus what the court actually says. And so it's really important to understand what's happening, why it's happening, why it matters, and how it's going to shape the future of the legal industry. So in high stakes matters, perception often becomes reality. And Jen, you know that I'm known for saying perception is 9/10 of the truth.
Yes.
And so no matter what is reported, no matter what the headline says, no matter, a lot of articles, even though most of them are online now, they still have limited amount of space. I use space in air quotes. It's important to understand that this is changing the face of the legal industry. We've never seen anything like this. And, if you go back to, 40 years ago, a headline from 40 years ago may or may not be found now if the publication hasn't digitized everything, or you have to go and research it in libraries and the old microfiche. Yeah, we had to learn that in college and law school. now these headlines are live forever. And I suspect a few months from now, I don't even want to say a year, a few months from now, one of the big things that it already happens, right? A corporation is referred to a law firm or they're looking for a high stakes law firm that specializes in a particular area or has a reputation in a particular area. Like let's say it's bet the company litigation or mergers and acquisitions. They go and look at those websites, they Google it or search it on whatever platform they search on, and they look at headlines. And how does this play into the culture of their organization? And I do really believe that there's going to be major opportunity costs that we're never going to know.
Mm-hmm.
We're never going to know the extent to which this has damaged a lot of these firms. So I'd be interested to look 6 months to a year from now, look back at this episode and see which firms have survived, which ones haven't, and why.
And what a masterclass, I think, for lack of better word, that Perkins Coie has demonstrated in the legal community. To your point about legal nuances getting lost in headlines and in articles, there are so many world issues that have occurred over the last many years. And, we talk internally in the legal industry, and there are so many nuances that the general public don't know about. So, could you talk for a minute about um, the position to start perkinscoiefacts.com and really demonstrate through that microsite what the issues are and reporting the facts so that there is one place that the general public could find this information?
So using microsites is not a new concept. We've been doing this now as long as websites have been available. But in this case, Perkins Coie creating their microsite is a very smart tactic to share information and to let your voice be heard. And it's also smart because it cuts down on the need for actual media interviews and allows the journalists to go directly to the site to get statements. Like it's all compiled in one place. And so Jen, years ago, I did pharmaceutical marketing. This is going back more than 25 years. And we would often create sites, and you see this in the pharma industry quite a lot, where they create a site, get the facts about diabetes. And, it's sponsored by a pharmaceutical company that wants you to be using their product, right? Those are more sales tools. In this case, this is a communication tool to manage these high stakes issues. And while this would be what we call crisis communications, I really do believe Perkins Coie has moved into an issues management space. In other words, they're not seeing it necessarily as a crisis right now because they're managing the messaging.
Mm-hmm.
Crisis, I usually think of as something that it needs immediate, constant attention. And this does need immediate, constant attention, but it's now moved into the issues management side where everyone knows about this site in the media, right? They know to go there, they know what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be interesting to see how it continues to play out. But there are many ways of communicating with your target audience, a microsite being one of them, but also making sure that the message is always clear and concise, timely. In other words, you don't start a microsite and not keep it up to date on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
These are the types of things that need constant attention. But they're doing a great job managing the message.
So it's a great distinction between issues management and crisis communications. And I wonder from that perspective, what should law firms be asking themselves about possible executive orders, EEOC letters, signing amicus briefs, and the administration targeting their DE&I or ESG initiatives?
So, well, there's hundreds of questions. So, for example, we met with the C-suite of leaders at an AM law firm last week and probably had 3 pages of questions. So that was our client intake. And so for the lawyers listening, there's a lot of questions that need to be asked because they're very specific to your individual firms, your culture, your risk tolerance. But some of the more basic things that need to be asked is, do we have a crisis communications plan that accounts for being pulled into politically sensitive or high stakes matters? And if you have a general crisis communications plan, which I think I'd say most AmLaw 100 firms have them now. I can tell you most AmLaw 200 firms. I can't tell you, let me rephrase that. I believe most AmLaw 200 firms have them, but if they don't, they should. And I know that we've worked with some to create those crisis plans, but it's not as if anybody ever saw this coming, like executive orders, right? So if you think about what did you learn from COVID and did you update your crisis plans for any type of pandemic to handle it, now is the time to update and or create those plans for high stakes matters. Another big question is, are our internal protocols and decision-making processes defensible under scrutiny? So what do I mean by that? It could be, how are we hiring people and are we doing it legally? And I'm not talking about the new term legally that is being thrown around by the administration. I'm talking about, are they fair? Are they just? Not just hiring people for D&I sake, but hiring people because they are qualified. And there's so much, and I've never practiced in the employment law space, so I'm not going to get into the details of that. But that's one of the things that has been in question. And I think most firms can say we do the right thing, and they follow the law. And if they don't, they should be, or should have already changed their protocols a little bit to make sure they're fully compliant. And that doesn't mean getting rid of them. It just means changing some of the language and processes to make it better. It doesn't mean dropping your ESG initiative or dropping your D&I initiative. So I think that's really important. And then another thing that's now happening is law firms need to ask themselves, have we considered federal and state mandates and policies that may affect our practices? For example, the Florida Attorney General issued a policy, and again, I'm using air quotes for those who are listening, stating that the state will cut ties with law firms that promote DE&I and or ESG initiatives. Now, this is a big one, right? A lot of law firms across the country have a presence in Florida, and they need to be asking themselves, what does this mean for us? I do believe there's something similar that's either happened or happening in Louisiana. I know that there's a lot of the southern states, a lot of what we call the red states, where these are going to be issues. So you really need to be looking at those things and gearing up for it, especially if you do work that is state and or federally funded. So that's a whole nother issue that law firms are facing now. And I'm sure we'll put some articles, or at least one article that's not behind a paywall, in our show notes. And another thing is, have we aligned our communication and legal strategy in a way that protects the firm's reputation without compromising legal integrity? And so there's a lot to be asked. I know we're getting short on time, but these are the things, these are just 4 questions of probably 50 that every firm needs to be asking itself. So for sake of time, I'm going to stop there and just say that we are seeing things that we've never seen before in the legal industry. We need to protect the rule of law. We need to protect the Constitution, and we need to protect our business entities, including our clients and our employees. And law firms now, especially with this decision that came out of DC federal court, I think we may see a sea change. So I'm hopeful, as I've said, for the first time in over 100 days. I also do, out of respect for the Philadelphia Bar Association, since I mentioned them, I do want to give a quick shout out to their chancellor, which is, in other words, president, Katayun Jafari, who did a phenomenal job. And I'm going to share, Jen, the link for where they have all the photos from the Philadelphia Bar Association, the speeches, incoming Chancellor Ezra Wongler. Ezra, they were a client for 14 years from Feldman Shepherd. And I've just been so proud to call these people my friends. I can't say it enough. Like, I just am hopeful. And kudos to every firm that's standing up for itself.
It's amazing. Friday was the most hopeful I'd felt in a while. So I share that with you. And hopefully our listeners are feeling a sense of hope as well. Thank you so much for walking us through that. I've been reading to keep up with it, but it's really helpful to hear kind of the insights from someone who's attended Law Day and renewed their oath, but also running through the high stakes and kind of crisis considerations that law firms need to be thinking about. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We continue to appreciate your feedback and your recommendations. We hope that you will leave a review if you've enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
And make it a great week. Let's keep fighting the good fight.
On Record PR is produced by Jennifer Simpson Carr and Matt Henderson, with support from the team at Furia Rubel Communications. This episode is edited by Isabel Horan and Christian Yamula. Visit www.onrecordpr.com for resources and more information.